A few years ago, when I was 20, I had a very bad car accident. A drunk truck driver hit my car, and I was in the hospital for several weeks. I broke my arm and it took me a long time to learn to walk again. The scars took even longer to heal. It's been almost 3 years since that accident. And even though it wasn't my fault, I still drive very carefully. What I remember most about that day is that my family didn't come to see me at the hospital. The reason, I thought, was because my sister went into labor. Ironically, I was on my way to the hospital to surprise her because that's where she was going to give birth. But I had the accident before I arrived. At that time, I lived a few hours from my hometown, so it was easy to go back and forth. When my parents called me to tell me that my sister was in labor, I decided to drive to the hospital to surprise her. I borrowed a friend's car and left. But on the way, I had the accident and was taken to the nearest hospital. My parents were there, but they were very busy with my sister. So a friend stayed with me during those days. What disappointed me the most was that even days after my sister gave birth, my parents didn't come to see me. I understood that the situation wasn't the best, but it still bothered me. Despite being in intense pain and dazed after the accident, I called my parents several times. Especially every time someone from the hospital came to check on me. I always asked if my parents had called or if they had come to see me. And every time I heard the answer, I felt disappointed. Finally, a week after the accident, I received a call from my parents. But it wasn't to ask how I was doing. It was to ask me why I had been calling so much. They told me they had been ignoring my calls because they were with my sister and her baby. Their cold attitude surprised me, especially considering the situation. Still, I asked about my sister and my niece. They told me they were both fine. I thought that by then they would know I'd had an accident. But they didn't ask me anything about myself. My friends told me that they had sent messages to my parents everywhere. So my parents should have known about the accident already. I decided to tell them myself what had happened. I explained about the accident and how I had been trying to communicate with them for days. At that point, I at least expected some reaction. But they just said they already knew from my friends and didn't say anything else. I was furious. I asked them if they couldn't even pretend to care. They told me they hadn't wanted to talk to me because they decided to prioritize being with my sister during her delivery instead of being with me after the accident. They deliberately ignored my calls and messages. For that reason, I couldn't understand what they were saying. As far as I knew, the accident hadn't been my fault. The truck driver was drunk. But they blamed me for deciding to drive alone and called it irresponsible. They said it was very late at night and there was no need for me to be driving. When I explained that I was going to the hospital to see my sister, they replied that I didn't need to do that. They even said that the accident had been completely my fault. It was so cruel and insensitive of them that I got extremely angry and hung up without saying anything else. Later, I found out something worse. When the people who found the accident scene called 911, the authorities first contacted my parents. But they refused to come and asked not to be called again about the matter. Emergency services then contacted my friends because I had their information on my cell phone. That's how my friends found out about the accident. Even when emergency services told my parents that their daughter had been in an accident and that they needed to go to the hospital quickly, they didn't go. My family's only response to the situation was to blame me for what happened. After that incident, I realized that even though I always did my best for them, my family wasn't interested in being there for me. Even my sister never tried to contact me since that accident. I haven't had contact with my family in the last 3 years. I left them completely. Before all this, we had a normal relationship. But I always felt like I was being left aside as the older sister. My sister was always the priority, and my family clearly showed me that during the accident. To be clear, I'm not angry with my parents for not coming to see me while my sister was giving birth. What hurt me was that they didn't consider it important to come see me even after she had already had her baby. I didn't even expect my sister to visit me. I understood perfectly that she couldn't do it right after giving birth. But my parents could have come. My sister had her husband and her in-laws taking care of her. Fortunately, I had friends who were good enough to stay by my side and help me recover. They and their parents took care of all the expenses of my recovery and other costs. I'm still paying them back. But I'm truly grateful for everything they did for me when I couldn't do it myself. Anyway, I can't handle all the expenses on my own. It's been 3 years since the incident. And my parents have never tried to contact me. Many of my relatives wonder why I no longer maintain contact with them. I always kept the reasons to myself. There was a tacit agreement not to talk about the incident with anyone in the family. I stayed true to that until recently. But now they decided to bring it up. A few weeks ago, one of my aunts contacted me after a dinner my parents organized at their house to celebrate my sister's promotion at work. During the gathering, the subject of why I had distanced myself from the family came up. After being repeatedly questioned, my parents finally decided to tell their version of what happened 3 years ago. I guess they thought it was no longer necessary to keep it a secret. However, when they told the story, they conveniently altered the facts of what happened after my accident. Some things were true, like that I planned to surprise my sister at the hospital and that I had a car accident on the way. But then they claimed they hadn't heard from me for days after the accident. According to them, when they found out, a lot of time had passed and they were more worried about my sister and her baby. They said they didn't think much about why I didn't contact them, and that when I finally did, the first thing they did was call me. They also claimed that I was so angry that I refused to talk to them. That is completely false. In addition, they claimed that they had tried to contact me several times after the accident, but supposedly I kept rejecting their calls because of what happened. According to them, since I stopped responding, they finally decided not to try to contact me anymore. In essence, they described the whole situation as a misunderstanding on my part. They painted me as a completely implacable villain towards them. In other words, after 3 years of silence, my parents started lying about me at a family gathering. They spread a false story that I abruptly rejected all contact with them after the accident. They said they had tried several times to talk to me, but that I irrationally cut ties with them out of anger. One of my aunts called me after that family gathering they held for my sister's promotion at work. Her voice trembled on the phone. She was clearly upset. When I told her the truth, she was stunned. "I can't believe your parents have been telling such horrible lies," she said. Her words made all the emotions I had been holding in for years come flooding out. Since I was a child, I was always compared to my sister. I still vividly remember the day of sports in elementary school. I was chosen as a relay runner and I practiced so much. My team came in second place, but my parents' attention was completely on my sister, who was the captain of the cheerleaders. "I wish you could stand out like your sister," my mom told me. Those words still resonate in my ears. I also remember the day I brought my report card home. It was always stressful. Even if I got an A, they asked me why it hadn't been a perfect score. Meanwhile, my sister, who got a B, received praise. "Very well done, honey." The day of my high school graduation ceremony was no different. I wasn't feeling well because I had been very stressed during exam week. But my parents decided to go to my sister's extracurricular presentation. They said goodbye with a "you're the strongest in high school" and left. I was desperate to balance academics and club activities. I also served as student council president and got a university recommendation. But my parents' attention was on my sister, who had landed the lead role in the theater club. Looking back, the difference in how they treated us was most evident during family trips. In the summer of my sophomore year of high school, we went to Napa Valley. It was a luxurious trip. We stayed in a luxury hotel. But that whole trip was to celebrate my sister's victory in a choir competition. Meanwhile, the previous year, when I won an award in the state science competition, there was no celebration whatsoever. I received a congratulation at the hotel. My sister got the bed with the best view, while I was given a cramped spot near the door. "You're stronger," they always said, as a way to justify that I had to be patient. At dinner, the menu was always centered on my sister's favorite dishes, without taking into account the foods I didn't like. The difference was clear. Even in school activities, I participated in the state swimming competition, but my parents didn't come to see me because they said they were too busy. However, they often attended my sister's volleyball practice games. "Your sister is emotionally delicate" was another excuse I heard frequently. Even my acceptance into university was overshadowed by the news of my sister participating in a theater competition. The pattern didn't change when I became an adult. After graduating from college, I joined an IT company and started building my career as a systems engineer. I worked overtime voluntarily and learned new skills on my own. At 25, I was promoted to assistant manager. And at 28, I was promoted to project manager. But my dad just said I was too serious. Meanwhile, my sister, who had dropped out of college and started working as a temp, was praised for finding her own way. At my first promotion celebration, my dad changed the subject, saying, "I hope your sister finds a job soon." My mom indirectly asked for help, saying, "You're stable, so please support your sister too." I started sending money to my parents when my dad got sick and retired early. At first, it was 500 pesos a month. But then my mom said my sister would also need money for her wedding, and the amount gradually started to increase. Before I knew it, 11,000 pesos a month became the norm. I gave up on the idea of buying my own apartment and lived a modest life in a small apartment. Still, I put up with it because I thought I was helping my family. As my salary increased and my bonuses grew, my parents' demands also increased. "We need to save for your sister's wedding fund," they would tell me. "Oh, we should start thinking about renovating the house." Before I knew it, more than a third of my income was going to my parents and my sister, just when I was trying to save for the down payment on my own apartment. When my sister's wedding approached, she told me, "You have savings, so it'll be fine," leaving me no room for discussion. They not only asked me to cover the 20,000 pesos the wedding cost, but also to help with the down payment on her new house, which completely emptied my savings. On the wedding day, I took care of everything, from decorating the venue, managing the reception, to organizing the photography. Despite that, my parents' speech was full of blessings for my sister and her husband, without a single word of thanks for me. As I watched my sister in her wedding dress posing for pictures with our parents, I felt an immense emptiness. I left the place in silence. My life took a drastic turn the day of the accident. I was stopped at a traffic light when a drunk truck driver crashed into my car at full speed. The impact was so violent that it clouded my consciousness. My thoughts were on my parents and in the ambulance. Barely conscious, I kept repeating, "Please contact my parents." However, my parents refused to answer the emergency calls. The reason was that they were busy attending my sister's delivery. They were in the hospital, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept reflecting on the meaning of family. The pain in my broken arm seemed small compared to the pain in my heart. Rehabilitation was exhausting. Walking exercises, arm therapy, none of it was progressing as I hoped. And I often felt like giving up. In those moments, it was my friends who supported me. They took turns visiting my hospital room, always offering words of encouragement. Even my friends' parents covered my medical expenses and allowed me to continue with the treatment. But my parents never visited me, not even once. The hardest moment came in the second week of rehabilitation. I had just started walking exercises, holding on to the parallel bars and taking one determined step at a time. A nurse encouraged me and said, "Take it easy. You're doing great." Sweating, I kept going. My friend Mary visited me almost every day. She would stop by after work and always brought my favorite books or magazines. "If your parents don't come, I'll be your family," she told me. How many times her words made me cry. Even my boss was understanding and told me to take the time I needed and focus on healing. My co-workers took turns visiting me and telling me updates from the office. Their presence made me feel connected to the world. By the third month of rehabilitation, I could finally walk on my own. My doctor told me, "Your strong will is the reason you recovered so quickly." But I knew the truth. It was thanks to the unconditional support of my friends. Meanwhile, my parents still hadn't visited me after my sister gave birth. My mom emailed me once, but all it contained was a picture of the baby and not a single word about my condition or well-being. Curiously though, I didn't stop sending money immediately. The habit of transferring 11,000 pesos each month continued even after the accident. Maybe deep down I hoped that this would be my last chance for my parents to realize their mistakes. If we could repair our relationship. But that hope was completely betrayed. My parents started distorting the truth about the accident in front of our relatives, as if I had rejected them out of irrational anger and cut family ties. When I heard the truth from my aunt, something inside me broke irreparably. The day I made arrangements to stop the transfers, The bank employee seemed baffled. "Are you sure you want to stop a transfer that you've maintained for years?" he asked me. I calmly replied, "Yes. It's no longer necessary." At that moment, my heart felt inexplicably lighter. It was as if I had finally freed myself from the burden I had carried for so many years. After that, my parents' lifestyle changed drastically. The trips abroad they took every year were no longer possible. Eating out at fancy restaurants was no longer feasible. Even my sister had to start working part-time on weekends to cover their expenses. After my parents' financial support ceased, at first, they bombarded me with angry messages. "I can't believe you did this to us. How could you abandon your family?" These accusations came almost daily. However, as financial reality set in, their tone began to soften. "We're really sorry about what happened. We should have been more considerate. We should have thought about your feelings." But those words of apology were always followed by, "Our life is really difficult now. Could you help us somehow?" It wasn't genuine regret but calculated apologies out of financial necessity. My sister's reactions were even more intense. "You know our parents live on their pension, right? My son's education costs are also high. How can you be so ruthless with your family?" Ironically, that word, family, was what I needed most during the accident. Relatives' reactions varied. My uncle said I was a spoiled brat. A younger sister who had taken advantage of me. That was the natural result. By showing hospital records and transfer histories, many relatives began to understand my decision. In particular, my aunt became a great source of support. "You've done more than enough for them. Enough with your family. It's time for you to live your own life." Those words gave me the confidence that my decision was the right one. It's been 6 months since I cut off financial support, and my life has changed significantly. I started taking a photography class, a dream of mine. The instructor, Mr. Smith, praised the unique perspective in my work. He said my photographs captured the subtleties of life, which made me cry. I started going on photography trips with classmates on weekends. Even when they learned about my past, they never judged me negatively. In fact, they supported my decision. I have become close friends with Carla, who also attends the class. We've developed a relationship where we can share our struggles and support each other. At work, I was chosen as the leader of a new project. I used to work overtime to financially support my family, but now I use my time for my personal fulfillment. I started going out to eat with my team members after work, and with one of them, I felt a special bond beginning to form. As my savings grew, I was finally able to buy the condo I had always dreamed of, a bright living room full of sunlight, walls where I can display my favorite photographs, and a quiet space just for me. I feel like this is the beginning of my new life. On weekends, I organize house parties and invite the friends who supported me during my rehabilitation days. They genuinely celebrate my new life and say, "You're finally living as your true self." Above all, I feel happiness being surrounded by people who understand and value me. And even without blood ties, I have found a genuine bond based on understanding and mutual support. I heard that my parents were forced to leave the house they had lived in for many years because they fell behind on mortgage payments. Their new residence is a 20-year-old apartment building a minute's walk from the nearest station. There's no elevator, and they have difficulty climbing the stairs every day. They had to sell most of their furniture and appliances. I heard that my mother tearfully sold her expensive dishes and sentimental belongings during the move. They were curiously watched by their neighbors and couldn't even lift their heads. My sister's finances also became increasingly difficult. Her relationship with her husband deteriorated, and even her parents-in-law accused her, saying, "Why should we get involved in your family's problems?" At a family gathering I didn't attend, my uncle addressed harsh words to my parents. "After having exploited your eldest daughter for so many years, how can you say anything?" he asked. Then another aunt added, "This is the result of favoring your youngest daughter and treating her this way." My parents kept their heads down the whole time, unable to find words to defend themselves. At family gatherings, my parents are no longer even invited in the same way. The same goes for my sister. I heard that during the Christmas family gathering, no seats were prepared for my parents or my sister's family. It seems that my mother, in particular, is struggling mentally. To avoid running into acquaintances at the supermarket, She now shops at stores far from home. My father has stopped playing golf on weekends, his favorite pastime, and prefers to stay home. I also heard that no one attended my nephew's birthday party, although invitations were sent out. Everyone declined, citing other commitments. I feel sorry for the child, who is not to blame. I also understand that this is the result of my parents' and sister's recent actions. My parents' health has also worsened. Living in a low-cost retirement apartment has probably been more difficult than they expected. I've heard that their air conditioner has broken down and they couldn't afford to repair it, leaving it as is. Sometimes I feel a pang of pain in my chest. But this change was necessary. For the first time, I feel like I'm really living my own life. It's a life not spent fulfilling someone else's expectations or enduring for someone else's sake, but a life for me. If it weren't for the accident, maybe I would never have come to this conclusion. Maybe people only realize the weight of their past mistakes when they face difficulties. But how much value does regret driven by financial necessity have? It may seem cold, but this is the path I have chosen. And for the first time, I feel true freedom.